a legendary great desert separated the borders of ancient Israel from the land of Egypt. This was the great and terrible wilderness of the Old Testament, the desert that the Hebrews had to cross on the exodus out of Egypt, Abraham on his journey between Canaan and Egypt, and Moses on his flight from Egypt to Midian. Traditional biblical scholarship has identified this legendary great desert with Egypt's eastern peninsula, the region known today as the Sinai. Called the Sinai Desert because of a medieval belief that this was where biblical Mount Sinai was located, Egypt's eastern peninsula has been erroneously associated with biblical Mount Sinai and Sinai Desert for centuries. In ancient Egypt, the Sinai was a mining area for the Egyptians, who used to mine turquoise in this region and used to call it Mafkat, the land of turquoise. This area was under Egyptian control as far back as the First Dynasty, and during the reign of Ramses II, the Sinai was considered Egypt Minor. It was also a popular passage for Bedouins moving between Egypt and the ancient Near East.
Again, plenty of extra-biblical as well as biblical evidence of constant moving back and forth between Palestine and Egypt, particularly in times of famine.
This differs very much from the Great Desert that is described in the Old Testament, and which the Bible describes as a great and treacherous desert that was located outside of Egyptian borders and control, and which took the Hebrews months to migrate across before reaching Mount Sinai.
In the 3rd month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai.
The only desert in the entire region that fulfills the biblical description given of the great and terrible wilderness of the Exodus is the Saharan Desert. As the largest hot desert on the planet, with an area of 9.2 million square miles and covering more than 30% of the entire African continent, it is no wonder why the Hebrews called the Sahara the Great Desert. For the same reason that the Sahara in modern times is called Al-Sahara al-Kubra, the Great Desert, a title identical to the one used in the Bible. This impenetrable wilderness took the Hebrews many months to migrate across. They began their migration in Egypt and migrated along the Nile before reaching Mount Sinai in Ethiopia. Here we have an important clue: the Nile, which the Bible tells us ran across the wilderness of the Exodus. This description could never apply to Egypt's eastern peninsula, which has no rivers running through it, much less the Nile River. After reaching Mount Sinai, the Hebrews were banned from entering the Promised Land and were ordered to wander in the desert for 40 years. This is another impossibility for the modern Sinai Desert, which the Hebrews, for many different reasons, could never have migrated within for 40 years, not only because of the geopolitical reality of the region at the time of the Exodus, but also because of the sheer size of this area and its proximity to the claimed Mount Sinai. The southeastern parts of the Sahara represented the edge of the borders of ancient Israel, where the land of Israel ended, and the great desert between Israel and neighboring countries to the north, such as the Philistines and the Egyptians. This region was called the Negev. The etymology of the word Negev is dry, something that is dry or barren, and scholars have interpreted this word to denote a desert of some kind. The Bible describes the Negev as the dry region between the land of Israel and the great wilderness leading to Egypt. This has led scholars to identifying the southern desert regions of modern-day Israel-Palestine as the biblical Negev. And for this reason alone, the word Negev is many times translated as the South, to fit the geography of modern-day Israel-Palestine. The real meaning of the word Negev is actually desert wilderness. And this word is used as a flexible cardinal point to describe the desert regions between ancient Israel and ancient Egypt. An example of this can be seen in Genesis 12:9, where the word Negev is used to describe Abraham's journey from Canaan towards Egypt. Here, the word Negev is usually conveniently translated as the south, to imply that Abraham had to move south from modern-day Israel to reach Egypt. This gives the impression that biblical Canaan could only have been located somewhere north of Egypt, somewhere in modern-day Palestine, Israel. The dilemma starts only when few passages later, in Genesis 13:1, we're told about Abraham's journey from Egypt back to Canaan. Here, the same word Negev that was used to describe Abraham's migration from Canaan to Egypt is used again to describe his migration from Egypt to Canaan. To avoid suspicion, the word Negev is usually translated here as a name for a specific region, and not as the south. After all, if Abraham on his journey from Palestine had to go south to reach Egypt, and then on his journey back from Egypt to Palestine again had to go south, that would be a clear contradiction in the biblical text. The real meaning of the word Negev here is simply the dry region between the land of Israel and the great wilderness leading to Egypt. That is, the southeastern parts of the Saharan Desert. And when Abraham migrated from Canaan, he had to go through this region to enter the great wilderness. And on his journey back from Egypt to Canaan, he again had to go through the same Negev to return back to Canaan. It's not until we have established the location of the great wilderness of the Old Testament that we can locate biblical Mount Sinai.